Yes, hi everybody, and thank you for joining us for our transition from FC to FD webinar. Also like to introduce and say a big thank you to our 4 panelists today who have kindly agreed to take part and share their backgrounds and knowledge with us all. We have with us Jeanette Barrowcliffe, who is FD at Meridian Business Support, Rebecca Griffiths, FD at British Polythene, Carolyn Ison at FD Titan Hardware, and Miles Jones, who's FD at Amadeus Accounting Services at NEC Group. The session is going to provide some valuable insight from our panelists about their routes to becoming finance directors and their advice for career progression. And we're aiming, if we have time, to do a quick Q&A afterwards. So if you would like to ask any panelist a question, please post it in the chat box below with the name of the person that you'd like to direct it to. If we run out of time, we are hosting a separate FD mentoring boardroom on the 11th of August where you can interact and ask questions to an additional FD mentor then, but we'll try and get through some questions at the end. So I think if we go on to the first question, we have, can you succinctly describe your route to FD and how you move through different roles? And Carolyn, if you'd like to start, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Abby. So I think I had a fairly typical transition through my career. So I started in practice, so I could kind of get that grounding in technical knowledge, auditing, management accounts, corporate tax, gave me that broad variety of experience. And then as soon as I qualified, I knew I wanted to go into industry. So I started as a management accountant and then swiftly moved into a financial controller role. And then since then, just moved on a few times to kind of fill some gaps in my CV. A couple of years ago, went to Tarmac, which is a Fortune 500 company, so much bigger than I was used to, but kind of gave me a different scope of role. And then, yeah, landed my first FD role in 2019. And I think because of the broad spectrum of experience I had gained through my career, kind of was definitely ready for that position.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Jeanette, how about yourself?
Very similar to Carolyn, to be honest, Abby. I started out in practice and then did a couple of moves. So I trained with EY and then moved to AstraZeneca and the co-op. And then 24 years ago, I moved to Meridian. But I moved to Meridian a bit like Carolyn. I didn't want to stay in practice. I wanted to get into industry. So a job came along at Meridian for a financial accountant. And I took that in a long time ago now, 24 years ago. Quickly became financial controller and then was appointed as FD in 2003. So I think, yeah, very similar. It's just opportunistic, I think, at the time. And the roles changed quite a lot in Meridian, so I've never felt bored.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Miles, how about yourself?
Slightly different, actually, to Jeanette and Carolyn. From university, I joined a graduate training program with Lloyd's TSB Retail Banking, which was a great foot in the door. Not a great graduate training program at the time, though, because it was in its infancy. So I moved quite quickly from that into investment banking down in London. And I was lucky enough to work in a quite small corporate reporting function where, sort of coinciding with my studies, we did a lot of stat accounts reporting, learned about the different notes within the accounts, a lot of management accounts reporting as well. And that gave me a great foundation, really. And at the time, the finance director for the company I worked for, he was a brilliant mentor for me. So I learned so much from him. I think then unashamedly, I chased the money when I qualified and moved to another company, which was much bigger. It was still investment banking. That was a very tough job, long hours. The people were very demanding, so that was tough, but it gave me a lot of resilience. My confidence as well got better because I learned how to sort of stand up to things I thought were right and so on. And then when I relocated back up to the Midlands, I moved to the NEC Group, where I've been since 2004. And I think what I've found at the NEC Group is I've been able to do a lot of different roles, initially at the sort of finance manager level, but drawing on my experience from working in banking and then also the different roles I performed within NEC Group. When the finance director opportunity came along, I was well suited to that, and it's worked out well so far.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Rebecca, finally, how about yourself?
So straight out of university, I think the first role is crucial. I got with a company that moved me around. So I was in industry, saw lots of different sides of finance, all the different ledgers, so management accounting roles. Similarly to Miles, you get qualified, you chase the money. So every role until my current role, it's been sort of 2 or 3 years, and it's been management accountant roles, FC roles, it's been different sectors, so service, manufacturing, retail, everything to get lots of different experience in different size companies. Sort of where I am now in manufacturing, and then it's a case of being a standout FC, and I was promoted internally.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Oh, lovely. Okay, right. So now we're on to question 2. Under what circumstances did you achieve the promotion from FC to FD? Carolyn?
Yeah, so in my case, it sounds slightly different to the other guys, but I've kind of moved around to get to my position of finance director. And I think that's largely due to the companies that I've been in before. You know, my first industry role in London, I was the #1 in finance, but the finance director position really didn't exist. So I've kind of moved gradually through the ranks, but through different companies really. And each time just try to make sure that I'm kind of moving closer towards that end goal, trying to fill some gaps in my CV, tried a couple of different industries, went to, different size companies to kind of get a feel, which was kind of good because I kind of then knew where I wanted to be. But again, it put me in that position in 2019 where I knew that the finance director role then was the role that I wanted. And I don't think I'd have accepted any other role that, wasn't a finance director. That was what I wanted. And I knew that my experience kind of put me in good stead to be able to take on that role.
Lovely. Yes, thank you. Jeanette?
Yeah, mine was an internal promotion like Rebecca. I've been with Meridian for a number of years, sort of 6 years by the time I got to 2003. There'd been 2 FDs, I'd been financial controller. I'd got to the point where, a little bit like Carolyn, I knew that I didn't want to stay as financial controller forever, but I love the company. And an opportunity came up where the FD that was there at the time left. And I got internally promoted, which was, kind of, I suppose, helped in that I didn't need to look outside because I really did love the company and I loved the industry. But I knew that I couldn't stay as a financial controller forever. I think I'd got to that point where, I think Miles talked about before, with experience and confidence. I got to that point where I knew I was ready to be an FD, and it just so happened that the previous FD was leaving. So yeah, that's how I transitioned in. It wasn't easy, I don't think. I think it was difficult because I was transitioning within the same company. So I still had the responsibilities of the FC with the new responsibilities of the FD.
Yeah.
So that was quite challenging for a while. But yeah, that's how I managed to get the FD role here.
Lovely, thank you. Miles?
Yes, I think what I found was there were opportunities to move sideways, which at first don't always appear that they're going to get you forward in your career, but they give you greater experience. And I think if you can move into an area where there are problems, there are challenges, whether that be on the recruitment side or on the sort of the commercial side of the business, or even just on the relationship side with perhaps the managing director of a particular part of the business and the finance team. If you can go in there and fix those things, you start to create this brand, this sort of reputation for yourself. And I was lucky enough to have those opportunities to move into problem areas of the business that needed fixing. And it wasn't because I was a fantastic accountant, perhaps. It was more about the fact that I think, given my experience of working with in an environment that was quite tough, I used that experience and my confidence to sort of create those strong relationships with managing directors who'd previously been quite skeptical of finance. And then once you got their backing, you form this sort of partnership. And it's like Starsky and Hutch, sort of Cagney and Lacey, everyone can see you working well together. The business starts to grow, achieve success. And all of a sudden, more doors start to open for you. Other people want you to move into their part of the business. And then when the finance director opportunity came along, I had a number of people backing me across different parts of the business. So it became, I wouldn't say it was an easy opportunity to get, but I certainly had a lot more backing than perhaps I would have done 3 or 4 years ago, and perhaps if I'd stuck in a safer role.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. Rebecca?
So similar to Miles, I think it's quite important that you almost make a brand of yourself. So you're there to do a role, you need to do that 100%. So you need to be accurate, you need to know everything about your role, but then you need to take it to the next level. So it's asking questions about the wider business. You know, the best finance people aren't just finance. So it's get involved with, you know, the operations, with HR, with marketing, with commercial, wherever it is possible, widen your knowledge. And then it's add value. It's ask the questions. Well, what about this? Well, are you aware that this will happen if you do that? And that's how you get this brand where people don't just see you as, oh, you're the FC, you look after the numbers, you do the accounts. I mean, certainly for myself, although it was internal promotion, I was at the point where I'd been with the company for 3 years and I knew it was time for me to move. I was only 34, hadn't thought about when do I want my FD role. In my mind, I was sort of placing it at 40 odd. So when there was an opportunity and I was asked if I wanted it, I certainly, personally, I didn't feel ready because naturally I didn't have that confidence. I hadn't thought about it. But then ultimately was, well, someone can come in and I can train them up to do the job, or I can do it myself. So let's have a go and do it. And so that's really sort of my route to FD. And, you know, looking back now, I don't know why I was so, I don't know, scared is the word. But, you know, sort of you jump in with both feet and crack on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being so honest.
Brilliant. Well, question number 3 for everybody. What advice would you give to an FC on how to succeed in securing the FD role? Carolyn, if you'd like to start again.
Yeah, and look, Rebecca just touched on it slightly there, and that's, you know, get to know the whole business, not just finance. You've got to think outside the box and not just, you know, your day-to-day activity. You know, typically finance has always been a service provider in an organisation, and you need to find ways of adding that value. And I've certainly, when I had my first financial controller role, I forced myself into so many meetings to the point where they'd be like, do you need to be here? And I'd be like, absolutely, I need to be here, because, you know, I can give you your numbers, but do you want me to understand them? And do you want me to help you drive forward? And I think that's been pretty key. And I, you know, I get involved to the point where they were then asking me to go to their meetings, and it does. And you need to add to that value. And it's all about business partnering. I think, you know, the old-fashioned kind of bean counter type accountants, you know, is no more. It is a business partnering approach. And like Miles said, you often, you know, are the number 2 to the CEO, the MD. And that's the way it should be. You should be joined at the hip and making decisions together and, you know, really working towards the strategy of the business. And I think that's the biggest change between an FC and FD. You know, everything you do, you're kind of like, well, how does that drive the business forward towards achieving our strategy? You know, and if it doesn't, don't do it. But also look at the gaps in your CV. Do you actually have the skills to be a finance director? Could you fulfill a typical job spec? You know, because you could just be a very, very good financial controller and you've just not had the opportunity to kind of go that step forward into that next role. So that's the advice I would give, really. Look at your gaps in your CV and just, you know, get to know the business as a whole, not just finance.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Jeanette?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much what Rebecca and Carolyn have already said. I think my advice would be, don't be an accountant. You know, I think accountants have got, I mean, stereotypically are not relationship builders and numbers people, you know, and if you want to progress, you need to come out of that box and you need to show people that you're not that typical accountant. And there's nothing wrong with typical accountants. I've got a great financial accountant who's essentially a financial controller, and she's brilliant. And the numbers are great, and, you know, and she does everything that I didn't like doing. So, but she doesn't want to be an FD. You know, she knows what she wants to do and she wants to carry on with the numbers. So I would say, a bit like what Caroline said, you know, look at what you've done in your experience you've got today and have a think about what you really enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy building relationships with people inside work and going to meetings that are and non-finance meetings, then probably the FD role's not for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if they are the things that you enjoy doing, then make sure other people can see that you can do that, because they will probably have that perception that you're an accountant and you're just good at the numbers, and you need to show that you're more than that. And you can, as Caroline said, understand the entire business. You know, I also invited myself, and I still do sometimes, to meetings that people go, why do you want to be here? You don't need to be here. You know, and quite often it's to help build that brand, or it's to understand what's going on, because then the numbers make sense, or the strategy that you're on, the direction of travel, that makes sense. So I think, yeah, I would say don't be an accountant, a typical accountant. Try and get out of that perception that people have of accountants.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that. And Miles, how about you?
A couple of things, really. I think when you work in finance, people outside of finance are sort of slightly scared of you sometimes, and you can turn up in meetings and you start having confidence in talking about financial performance. But those that struggle to see that can be a bit, well, I don't know how to approach this person. So I think don't be afraid of that. Use that as a sort of foundation for going into those meetings that sort of Caroline and Jeanette talked about, and building on that foundation and earning trust from the business. So then go to those operations board meetings, those sales meetings, have those figures that are relevant for that particular department with you, so you can sort of aid the discussion and add value, and people will start to see you as a friend and as a sort of trusted part of that team. I think take chances that will stretch you, especially if they give you a skill set or a CV experience that you don't have. Have a plan. If you want to be finance director by the time you're 40, I think it was Jeanette that said you've got moves if you can achieve them. They're not always achievable, obviously. I think one of the things that's helped me and the finance team at the NEC Group is that we've embedded ourselves in the business as well, physically. So rather than having this sort of finance team tucked away in the corner of a building, we sit right in the middle of the teams. And you then start to share in more of the day-to-day chat that goes on, and you can learn things about the business that way, rather than just going along to the odd meeting. And also found that doing back to the floor things as well with the business. So, we have lots of bars in the catering business. I've worked behind them on a couple of occasions, and it's amazing what you learn about how the business runs. You can then take that back to the boardroom and think about what the numbers are telling you, and again, add value that way. But I think the biggest thing is, if you see opportunities that look like they might be hard, but they're a gap on your CV, take those chances. I think in the long run, it's going to benefit you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that advice. And Rebecca, how about yourself?
The advice from me would be that finance director, it's just a job title. The four of us here will do completely different jobs. So although there's common themes like branding, add value, know your business, I think it's really important that the individual knows exactly what does it mean to them to be a finance director, what sort of role do they want, how do they think they can achieve it, and then invest in themselves, because no one's going to hand it to you on a plate. You need to do it for you. So really it's go out, be seen, do it all for the right reasons. And do it in your own way. Don't try and be someone else. Be yourself, doing what you're doing.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so on to the next one. What barriers have you faced through your career progression? Caroline, could you share that with us, please?
Yeah, sure. I think throughout my career, I think I've been slightly aware of kind of unconscious bias, and actually it's really lovely that there's two other fellow females on here, and I think that's kind of driven me in the past to maybe overwork, almost thinking that actually in terms of getting to promotion, you've got to work harder and longer than everybody else. I've often faced throughout my career, you can't have the career and you can't have the family at the same time. So I've often almost question myself as to where I want to be. Am I good enough to be an FD? Can I give it 100% and still be 100% at home with my children? Because I don't ever really do anything at less than 100%. I have to give it my all, and it's kind of like affected the confidence a little bit, where you kind of go, do I want it? Do I have to make sacrifices that actually maybe I don't want to make? And I think, as I'm getting older, you get a bit more perspective, and you kind of, you know, make more allowances, and you realise that actually working harder and longer isn't massively effective, and you've got to drive towards that good work-life balance, which I don't have all the time. I'm not going to pretend that I do. I work long hours still, but I know that I can do it now. And I think that's the barrier for me. Almost convinced myself that I couldn't have, you know, the life, the family. You know, I've got two small children who I adore, but do you know what? I actually doing a pretty good job as a finance director as well. So I think it's just having that confidence. And again, I have gone through the ranks through male-dominated industries. So I have not had brilliant women around me that I could aspire to. You know, it's not like I had some, you know, a lady that had children and I saw her like completely nailing it. I didn't have that. It was mainly men. So again, lovely to see other women on here. And I've recently joined a women's leadership program because I realised that I had a lack of senior women in my life. You know, I think networking is important and having a mentor, but they were mainly male. So yeah, that was my main barrier.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Jeanette?
Yeah, pretty similar, I think. I think, you know, lots of barriers. You know, the very first FD forum I went on after I got promoted to FD was 98% male, and it was black tie 3 nights a week, and all you could see was a sea of black suits. So, and you know, very male dominated industries. You know, Meridian, I think we do pretty well on the split between female and male. But the board, for the majority of years that I've been on it, has been mainly male. I've been the only female. So, do I see that as a barrier? I think it is. But only if you see it as a barrier. I think the biggest barrier that I faced is myself, and it's that confidence piece. You know, and someone said to me years ago, and I think this is what helped me get through that, was what's the worst thing and the best thing that can happen? And actually you suddenly realise that, you know, no one's better than you are. You know, you're just as good as everyone else. Yes, you have to work hard, and you know, some people are more intelligent and some people are better at building relationships and things like that, but everyone's got their own skill set. But if you were to say yes, if you've got that opportunity to become an FD and it's what you want to do, and what's stopping you from saying yes? Because what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, the best thing is that you really enjoy that role, but the worst thing is what? You leave and get another job and you realise that that's not for you. I think that's been the biggest barrier for me, is that, I mean, not now as much, but certainly in the early years, was that confidence and belief that I could do it. You know, did I deserve to be in that role? So you let someone else go and do it. And then you realise that, you know, they're actually not, they're kind of in this, I think people do it, don't they? They see a role and they don't quite know what happens in that role. So they make it something that it isn't. And then you suddenly you suddenly go into that role yourself and you realise it's not that bad. You know, and it's kind of all the scales come off your eyes and you think, actually, it is difficult and there is a lot of responsibility being an FD, you know, but it isn't that much different to being a financial controller in a way. So yeah, I'd say the biggest barrier for me has been myself.
Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, taking those chances like Miles mentioned earlier on. Miles?
Similar to Jeanette, really. I think it's that confidence thing, especially when you're younger, and opportunities present themselves. You don't always see them for what they are. You don't grasp them because you think the gap's too big, that leap is too big. And I think the other thing, I suppose, is that if you stay within an organisation for a long time, you can get pigeonholed as a certain type of person, a certain type of finance director, or sorry, a certain type of finance manager or financial controller, so just below that level. And you know, so I think, you know, maybe you're great at actually doing, you know, the actual pure finance side of things. Maybe you're a great people person. Maybe you're great at the commercials. People don't necessarily understand that you could be good at all of those things because you're not given the opportunity. So I think you need to think about, you know, if and how you can change this view, or even if you need to, you know, is that the right time to move to a different company if people are just seeing you as a financial controller and you don't have the broader skill set to be a finance director. So I think those two things really, try and think about how you're perceived. Don't let that stop you from progressing, and have confidence to go for things.
Thank you. Rebecca?
So probably for me, sort of the biggest barrier was it was age. So I was in an industry that was filled with middle-aged white men, should we say. So I'm sat there at the board table with them thinking, these guys have got 15, 20 years more experience than me. They are experts in their field. What am I doing here? What do I know? And it did take a while to realise that actually I know my numbers inside out, that I offer a fresh view of the business. I ask all the probing questions to get people thinking about the business again. So it's that acknowledging that what you perceive you should be and what you are, and therefore what you can bring and the values I had. So I was bringing, if you like, fresh eyes. I was asking all the what might be deemed as the silly questions. These other guys weren't, because they've been there forever. They know the answers. So it's good to ask the questions, because it makes people think, you know, sort of, well, why are you doing that? You know, just because you've done it for a long time, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I think also what Jeanette and Miles touched on, therefore it's a confidence thing. You know, sort of it's as soon as you realize that you don't have to be confident in you being an FD, whatever you think that image is going to be, but you're confident in you will shine through. And that's why people sort of will come to you and ask you questions, because they respect you for you, not for being an FD. So it's almost that you know, once you've made the move, it's about you, not necessarily your job title, and it's what value you add in the different parts of the business. And you know, similar to Carolyn, it's a pretty male dominated industry, and yeah, great for banter, and I'm all for equal rights, but if it means that when I speak, all the gentlemen in the room listen, great, I'm using that to my advantage, everyone's going to listen to me, rather than if it's, you know, two of the guys having a conversation that might be trying to talk over each other. So it's about finding what you can and using it to your advantage, really.
Thank you.
Brilliant. And on to the next one. How did you upskill in order to be FD ready? Carolyn, if you'd like to start again.
Yeah, I think it's just continual development, and kind of having that self-awareness where you can identify the gaps that you've got in your knowledge. And I've never been afraid to grab opportunities that have been presented to me. I like a challenge, and I'm one of those people that if I see a problem, I have to try and fix it. But that's kind of done me well over the years, that people respect that. And it helps with business partnering as well. If you kind of seem to get your hands dirty, it builds that respect up. But I love networking and building relationships. And I think that's always key, especially, you know, I aspire to be a leader. I don't want to be a manager. I don't just want to be a director. I want to be a leader. And I think the people element is really, really important, and something that I've worked on over the years. And there's a phrase that I always try and live by, and that's support or lead and never complain. Because I think I learned quite early on that was a trait that I didn't like in other people that were meant to be my leaders. You know, they'd spend quite a lot of time moaning about stuff. But I was like, well, that's just the problem. Like, where's the solution? So even if I find myself having a bit of a whine, because we all do it, I think, okay, but how can I solve that? How can I move it forward? Because actually in a month's time, I don't want to be moaning about this anymore. So it's that self-awareness and continual learning. You have to keep yourself current. You know, how can you identify opportunities and risks within your business if you don't know what's going on in the outside world? So it's kind of keep in touch with that externally, but also both internally as well. So what are your ops guys up to? What are the commercial guys doing? And just keeping everything up to date as much as you can.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And Jeanette, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of these already. I think, you know, spending time with the CEO and the MDs of the various businesses within our group certainly helps build that brand. Being up to date with your CPD, and that's not just doing online courses or reading things. That's going out to. I go to a lot of our trade body events. So I get to meet with peers. I got to meet with recruiters. So Meridian's a recruitment business. So, you know, going out and understanding the industry from an external point of view and not just internally But equally going on as many different, I think I got on a couple of the top 4 mailing lists, going along to their events, be them at, 8 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night. And I've got a family, so I can sympathise with Carolyn. It's difficult when they're young, but, if it's what you want to do, then you need to do it. And I think I would change that question to not be just in order to be FD ready, it's to continue to be an FD. You've got to continue to be upskilled and relevant and adding value. I think that was mentioned earlier on. You're only as good as the week that you're in now. You've got to continue to be ready and fresh and up to date. And if you manage more than the finance function, which some FDs do, like I do, then you need to understand those functions as well. If it be that HR, IT, whatever else you've got in your business, if you've got that as responsibility, you need to be up to date with those. And I think, I think it's very true. You need to be acting to be doing the job before you've got it. So going that extra mile and putting the extra effort in and building that brand like we talked about before, so that people can see that you're ready to be the FD. And then moving away from the numbers. The numbers are important, but it's not as important as the rest of the stuff like strategy. And and if you need to go on a course to understand strategy and the best ways, or project management or something like that, then do that. Just invest. And if your company won't invest in you, then do it for yourself. I think Caroline mentioned that before. Go out and do it yourself, because if that's what you want to do, then you need to put the effort in.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Jeanette. And Miles, how about you?
Just touching on something that Jeanette mentioned there, really about your company investing in you. So I was lucky enough that my company put me through a management development program at Cranfield. So that was great to get that external influence. Like-minded people, but not FDs, in the same room together over a period of time, doing sort of these sort of mock project work and so on. It was brilliant. It really opened up your eyes to how other people think, and they think along similar lines. Just because they don't work in finance doesn't mean they think differently. So that was really good. And I think more specifically, I had the chance to do an interim finance director's role for 18 months, where we were setting up a new subsidiary. It was a bit of off you go, sort it out sort of thing, but I was allowed to make mistakes, and you can really learn from those mistakes. We do a lot of coaching as well in the company I work for. So one of the things that really comes up in that is, well, what's the worst that can happen? And I really took that to heart in this interim role and let a lot of bad things happen. Luckily, none of them are catastrophic, but you really learn from those things, and they make you a stronger, more reliable finance director. And once you've got that skill set that you can rely on, your confidence just soars. But I think more generally, I would say move around, acquire different skill sets. We've spoken about this before. Try to get into teams that have good exposure to senior people. But then just, I think Caroline said at the start, be reliable, and use that reliability to then start to add value, understand your business, and then something finally just become an ally to the CEO or the MD, so that you have that. I think Caroline said it again. You're joined at the hip.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's a really strong bond, and it's hard to break then. And you have that trust. They'll come to you with these crazy ideas, and you can go with them if you think they're good, or you can have the confidence to go, that's a bit crazy. We won't do that at the moment.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Miles. And Rebecca, how about yourself?
Nothing new to add to that, really. It is all about get involved internally, externally, start creating your brand, but start creating yourself as you're the go-to person. If someone's going to ask you a question or some advice, but then it's how do you make yourself that person? So also communicate what you're doing. I had a conversation with an FC this morning. She's like, well, they don't know what I do. It's like, but you didn't tell them what you do. It's, we're all at a stage now where we have to promote ourselves. So if you want to progress, find people that you trust and tell them that you want to progress. Let them know what you're doing. Therefore, if they see anything, a networking event or a short course that they think would be good for you, they'll pass it your way. And then word will get round that, this is a person that is going somewhere. And then it's you've got to invest in yourself, because if you're not taking the first step and showing you're doing what you can within your own resources. You can't really expect your company to back you, just on a whim. So it's use all the resources you've got. And it all goes back to the internal, external. It's not just your work network, your own sort of company network. It's not just best practice sharing. It's, speak to friends outside of work. They'll do things completely different. But if you've got a scenario, how would you deal with this? Getting somebody's perspective on it that is out of your industry, out of your company, that's what helps develop you as a person as well. So just invest in yourself and get involved.
That's excellent, thank you.
Okay, so what do you see as the main differences between the FC and the FD role? Carolyn?
I think it's the more strategic thinking element and being completely adaptable and flexible. You've got to be able to see the bigger picture, and you've got to have a more commercial side to the way you work and the way you look at things. I think as a financial controller, you pretty much have probably 80% of the time, you probably have a set routine. You've got to do the management accounts, you've got to do cash flow, forecasts, whatever. I think your job is fairly defined day to day, whereas as an FD, and I don't know if everyone finds the same thing, no 2 days are the same, and you have to be able to prioritize your workload. Even though you have things like reviewing accounts, stat accounts, corp tax, whatever, generally you almost define your own schedule, and you have to be able to cope with that, because I think that's quite a big step between financial controller and FD. It's like, all of a sudden I don't really have a timetable. What am I meant to be looking at? But essentially you need to work out what you need to look at. You need to be able to identify those opportunities and risks that exist within the business. And if you've been developing yourself, like we said, in terms of upskilling, that should be fairly easy to do, especially if you work closely with your board or the senior management team. They will, normally point out the areas of concern. But I think it's the being able to forward plan, and it's always that thinking, how does it affect the wider business? What's the impact of that? How are we going to drive, our strategic plan? And it's that planning element. And I don't want to say the word too often, but it is that bigger picture thinking. I think that is the main difference.
Great, thank you. Jeanette?
Yeah, absolutely what Carolyn's just said. It's that helicopter view. It's and no 2 days being the same. Every day, But I think one of the biggest differences is you're it. As an FC, you've got someone you can go to. You've got someone who can, if you're not sure what to do, you've got someone who can tell you what to do. You've got someone who can make the decisions. The responsibility sits with your line manager as the FD. And when you're the FD, and I remember feeling this when I first got into the FD role, I was the most senior finance person in the business, and that was quite scary. And that, I think, is for me, the biggest difference. Yeah, you've got the strategy, you've got the helicopter view, you've got all of the stuff that we talked about, but it's that realization of, I've got no one else. You've got outside people, don't get me wrong, you've got peers, you've got friends, you've got internal colleagues, you can bounce ideas off your FC if you've got a really good FC, but it's that realization that you are it. People will come to you and you've got to make the final decision if it's to do with finance or strategy or whatever it is. And that relationship with the CEO is really important. And the other MDs or ops directors, if you've got them in the business, that's really important. And I don't think as a financial controller, you really have that depth of relationship.
Great, thank you. Niles?
I'm actually going to read something out that I saw in an article not long ago. I think really encapsulates the answer to this question. It's less about getting the work done and more about making sure it's done correctly. So that's leading, not managing, and getting your head up from the data to add insight by using your experience. I think that just sums it up in a nutshell. I think the other thing that probably doesn't necessarily sort of touch on though is that actually as a leader you can empower others. So that's really important. So that then gives you the freedom to do the things that you need to do. So it's a double-edged, well, not double-edged, sorry, there's two benefits really. It's you're letting other people grow so they can be the finance directors of the future, and you're also freeing up your own time so that you can focus on the things that really add value to you and to the business. So it's not just about managing people, it's about leading them, inspiring them, being at the heart, I think Jeanette said, being at the heart of the strategic process, and you sort of using your experience, the fact that you've got these allies around the business that you've hopefully created over a period of time to really bring it all together. You turn it into numbers. Yeah, great. That's one of the outputs. But I think if you can do all of that, and it's obviously hard, then that'll really stand you out. And I think those are the key differences. And I think as somebody else said, financial controller, routine, checking out the numbers, making all the controls are in place. That's great. But finance director just needs to step away from that and lead people.
Thank you. Good. Rebecca?
So going back to when I first became FD, one of the biggest differences was I made the decisions, whereas before I'd always prep, here's the information, you boss go make the decision. And that's really scary. First time round, what if I get it wrong? But, like Miles said, what's the worst that can happen? But really, I just wanted to reassure people that, if you've already got the information anyway, you know what the answer should be because you're already prompting your FD to make that answer. So all you're doing is just following it through. It isn't really any difference. It's sort of your name against it. And because of that, it's really important if you are making a decision that you're explaining why. So if, for example, you've got a credit controller saying, no, they can't have this order, they're over the credit limit, but you've got a commercial sort of director saying, but things need to go out the door, it's a bit of a short month, and you're trying to make this decision and be the balance really. And so therefore, it's important that if you're saying, actually, yes, it can go, you then need to explain, for example, to the credit control that, look, they're a really good customer, and they might be over the limit, but they always pay on time. There's no issue with them. The risk is minimal. It needs to go for the sake of the business. So again, it's that communication. And then also the responsibility. So, we talk about the helicopter view. Yes, we need to be aware of everything that's going on in the whole business, but how can one person know what's going on in your business, obviously dependent of the size? So therefore, it's creating that culture where people are feeding things up to you. And that goes back to your branding. So it's, I call it's personal relations. It's knowing that if your guy in the security hut, what his wife's called. So if anything goes on, he'll tell you about it. It's knowing what's going on the shop floor, why there's a machine down, why we can't get the part. But it's also, like we've said before, it's knowing what's going on in your industry. Oh, raw material prices are going up, right? What are the forecasts? But you can't possibly know everything firsthand. So if you're creating that honest and open culture where people are going to automatically let you know, and then it goes for sort of your finance team as well. You don't need to micromanage them if you've got this culture, because they will automatically let you know what you need to know. You don't need to know that a customer paid if the customer always pays on time, but you will need to know if there's a problem with a naughty customer, for example. So it's that. So it's the decision making, communication, and the culture in order for you to achieve your responsibility.
Thank you for that.
Brilliant. And on to the last question. What would you say your top tip for becoming an FD is? Carolyn, if you'd like to start again.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered off a lot on collaboration and business partnering. I think they're all quite key, but essentially, trying to find one top tip was quite difficult. But I think essentially back yourself. You need to just be confident. And even when sometimes if you don't feel confident, try and project that confidence. Because you know what, as the guys have said, what's the worst that can happen if you don't know the answer to something or you get something wrong? It's not the end of the world. And I think you need, build up your resilience, learn to deal with it, because no doubt you'll get some difficulties in a boardroom at some point. I think we've all been there. But it is, just have the confidence to kind of go, you're never going to know everything, but keep learning, identify what you don't know, try and fill that gap, never pretend to know something. I've seen people do that over the years. I hate it. So I never do it myself. I'm quite happy to go, do you know what? I don't know, but do you know what? I'll go and find out for you. Or do you know how to do this? I don't, but I will go and find out. And, next time they ask me that question, I absolutely will know the answer to that. So yeah, it's a confidence thing. And, as from a mum point of view, if there's other mums out there, thinking financial controller to FD, am I going to have to make sacrifices? Actually, when you get to finance director, you do manage your own schedule. So actually, you know, you can almost make a bit more time. You know, I quite often will finish at 5, spend time with my kids, but I'll log on late at night, and that's just accepted. And you can kind of, you know, as long as the job gets done. And I think we're in a changing world, particularly with the pandemic over the last year, where people have changed the way they look at flexible working. But that always held me back. You know, I can't leave, I can't move on, I can't develop, because, you know, I will have to work harder and I won't have time with the kids. But you know, just if there are people out there that worry about that, you know, I'm a good example of the fact you can make it work.
Brilliant, thanks very much for that, Carolyn. And Jeanette, how about yourself?
I think we've covered an awful lot, haven't we? I think the top tip for me would be, don't be afraid. I think don't be afraid of saying yes, don't be afraid of saying no, don't be afraid of shouting up. You know, you will have a different viewpoint to other people on the board or other people in your business. I was actually pregnant when I got promoted to FD with my son, and I found out I was pregnant after I was told I was going to be appointed as FD. And I went to see the CEO and explained and said, I've just found out I'm pregnant, and if you want to change your mind, you can. And he was great, really supportive all the way through it. But I could have at that point thought, there's no way I can do this. 2 small kids, because my daughter was 3 at the time. There's no way I can do this. And I just thought, you know what? What's the worst thing that can happen? So, you know, you're always going to have people that don't agree with your viewpoint. You are, as the FD, I firmly believe you are the conscience of the business. You're there to bring, you know, your board will be made up of sales and operational people. And quite often I quite often use one of the peers' descriptions. They're quite often the Tigger. You don't want to be the Eeyore, but you want to be the person that brings everybody back down to earth and be the reality check. And that's what I mean by being the conscience of the business. So it can be difficult doing that, but you should never be afraid of saying what you think. Never be afraid of saying you don't know, as Carolyn's just said, or making mistakes. No one's perfect. So I would say my top tip is just don't be afraid. Just go for it. Make it work. Things just happen, don't they? Karma works. You know, you get back what you put out. All of that, I believe all of that. So I would just say don't be afraid.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jeanette. And Miles, how about you?
Yeah, it's quite hard to come up with one tip, isn't it? So I'm probably going to ignore that request and come up with a couple. I think if you forge relationships, partnerships with influencers, yeah, that's a good thing to do. Seek out new experiences that add value to your brand, you know, to your CV. And then one of the things I took away from Cranfield when I went was, I think if you can have gravitas, then when you say, as Karen said, I don't know, people actually respect that. And so, well, I mean, I really respect this person, and they say they don't know. So, you know, or you say yes, and people believe you, or say no, and people believe you. So, you know, don't be afraid to have confidence in yourself. Exude that confidence. Not when it's all BS, obviously. You know, sort of. But I think, you know, if you know what you're talking about, then yeah, believe in yourself.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Miles. And Rebecca, finally, how about you?
Well, rather than my advice, I'll just share my best bits of advice that I've ever been given. So the first one was, be yourself. If you're trying to be something you're not, people will see straight through you. So stay authentic to yourself. And then the second piece of advice, which came from a husband who is not in the corporate world at all, and he was like, train your clients to work how you want them to. And by that is, you know, sort of it's okay to say, no, I can't do this, but I can do this. So it's, you know, make sure that you're doing things that help you, that aren't an added burden to what you're doing. So if someone sends you a spreadsheet that you're using and you need it in a different format, change the format, send it back saying, that's great, can you just use this one going forward? Because if that saves you half an hour, that's half an hour that you can be adding value elsewhere in the business. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say thank you very much for all the information that you've shared today. The insight that you've given the people attending, I think has been really valuable. So yes, thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one question, if I may put this to the person that's asked this question has directed it to all panelists. So we might do a quick round robin again, if that's all right with everybody. But it says that I work in a small business and have been FC for a number of years and have just been promoted to FD, but still need to carry out the FC role. Do you have any advice as to how to make the step up to FD while still performing FC duties? Carolyn.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult without the full picture, but I would probably sit down, review the activities you still have to do as a financial controller, and then work out what you're going to be expected to do as a finance director, i.e. sit with the CEO, MD, level out objectives, and then try and find, again, I don't know how big the team is, but if there are people below that she could develop to bring them to be able to do some of the tasks so she could free up her time. But ultimately, she needs to have that conversation with her boss, because actually you might have to go to the market and get a financial controller, or even if they're part-time, depending on how small the business is. But you can't be expected to do both roles at the same time. It's not possible.
Thank you. Jeanette?
So I've been in this position and it's hard. And I tried to carry it for a number of months thinking that was the right thing to do. My advice is, if the business can afford it, bring in a financial manager. You don't need to bring a financial controller in, just bring in someone to manage the finance team and do some of those jobs. Until you make that break, and this is purely from my experience, until you make that break, you cannot do the FD role to the best of your abilities, and you will always go back towards the FC tasks. So if the company can afford it, and I think you've just put down it's a small SME, if the company can't afford it, then like Carolyn said, if there's people in the team who you think are capable, then delegate some of the tasks. But I would do that as soon as you can, because otherwise it'll just carry on, and you just won't be able to do both jobs well. But it does depend on the circumstances and how big the company is.
Thank you. Yeah, Miles.
Yeah, I don't think I've got too much more to add, really. I suppose, yeah, what can the company do to help you, as well as you helping the company there? Because clearly you're doing two roles instead of one, which is always hard. I've been there as well. What tasks are important, which I think Carolyn said. Which tasks can you let go or reassign? And I think if you've got a team behind you, which you may not have in a small company, if you can empower others, I think, as Jeanette said, to do some of those tasks, then, and they might be willing to do more tasks for at the same level of their job with an eye on the future. So yeah, a bit of a combination really of the two answers from Carolyn and Jeanette, but it's very difficult. So I think I'd be going back to the business, if you can, saying, if you free up more of my time to be an FD, the business will probably benefit. So in the longer term, whilst you might need to lay out some money now, actually in the long run, it might be beneficial for everybody.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, just what everyone else has said. It's the prioritise what has to be done, what would be nice to be done, what can wait until there's a lovely sunny day and there's nothing else to do. But then it's also that communication. If things aren't being done, why aren't they being done? Feed upwards as well as downwards. It's I don't think it's uncommon when people think you can absorb things into your role because you are a high performer. But what they don't realise is the extra it takes out of you. And it's just how Carolyn said, you can't fit two roles into one. We've all done it. It just doesn't happen. Something's got to give. So it's not that that's a bad thing, but communicate it so people are aware of the effect of what they're asking you to do.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we're nearly out of time, to be fair. So what I would say to everybody that's been able to attend today is that you can join the Finance Network group for FCs, FMs, heads of finance, which is on the Guild app, something that we've set up to continue these kinds of discussions, and it's very useful for getting advice and ideas, etc. So we'll send the link round to join that in case we haven't been able to get through everybody's questions. Be a good idea to post it on there. As Abby mentioned, we've got the virtual boardroom coming up on the 11th of August, whereby we'll have a finance director in each breakout room, and we'll continue this topic at that point. So we'll send out a link for that as well. I think, yes, what I've got left to say is Carolyn, Jeanette, Miles, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely brilliant, and I'm sure we've all benefited from listening to what you've said. So thank you, and hopefully you'll be happy to do it again.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And yeah, that's it for today then. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.